Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. A big welcome to our fellow Weston League of Voters members and all of our wonderful guests. We're happy that the air quality is a little better today than it was yesterday. Helen de Keyser could not be with us today, and I am humbly standing in her place, so please bear with me. I'm Susan Moran. I'm a member of the steering committee and also one of the event coordinators. Up? Yes. Okay. I'm short. I'm not that much taller, Margaret. One small programming note before we continue is that we have some beautiful petunias to give away. And the secret of how the lucky person will be chosen is a secret which Carol Baldwin will reveal at the end of the luncheon. So today's event is the Betty Hill Forum on International Affairs. It was created to honor Weston resident Betty Hill on the occasion of her 100th birthday, and that was 23 years ago in the year 2000. Betty was a life member of the League of Women Voters and an active member in our league here, and an inspiration and a role model to all who knew her. She was a champion for women's rights and believed strongly in the importance of women being well-informed and active citizens at all levels of government, from the local level all the way through international. As she told us at the inaugural forum, quote, "Women have a powerful voice, not only in Weston and Connecticut, but also on global issues." Were she here, Betty Hill would have been particularly pleased to help us welcome this year's speaker, Tatiana Serafin. She would be pleased in no small part because Tatiana has such a wide-ranging career, and she's a powerful voice for women. Tatiana has been a staff writer at Forbes and a co-editor at its famed annual Billionaires list, which is a list I'm sure we would all like to be part of, and a management consultant to multinational corporations. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the New School, an MA in business and economic reporting from NYU, and an MA in Central European and Russian studies, and as if that weren't enough, a BS in foreign service from Georgetown University. Tatiana is an award-winning journalist, a journalism professor at Marymount Manhattan College, and a consultant to First Amendment Watch, which she helped launch in 2017. Most relevant to today's Betty Hill event is that she is the Senior Fellow for the U.S. Global Engagement Initiative at Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs. I hope I got that right. It's a mouthful. Where Tatiana is co-host for an event series and also a podcast called The Doorstep, designed to showcase how global news has an impact on our daily lives. The Doorstep explores and delivers insights on a remarkable range of subjects. For example, the current podcast on the website discusses what the escalation in the Sudan conflict means to the region. And you can find her podcasts on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. So, Tatiana, welcome to Weston. I hope you didn't have any trouble finding us here. We are eager to hear your insights on today's interesting theme, the influence of women leaders on world affairs, the case for optimism.
Let me adjust here. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all of you welcoming me back to Weston, because one of the things I want to say in thanking you is that we all come here standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, standing on the shoulders of Betty Hill, and I am honored to be the person here standing in her shadow and promoting her legacy of connecting local and global politics. I think that is so important because we are all so interconnected more now than ever, which I will talk about. My Weston connection is my aunt, Helena Fontaine, who joins us today with my cousin, Danielle Fontaine. So I know Weston well. I have been coming here for many years, and my husband is actually from Wilton. So if there's a Weston-Wilton rivalry, we won't discuss it now, but I'm very familiar, and I'm so glad and happy to be with you today. When Helen and I'm so sad she's not here, when Helen and I first started talking, I said, how did you find me? And thank you for promoting the podcast, but, as I'm always curious to hear what people think about the podcast and to know that people listen to the podcast. That's pretty exciting. We're in our third year, and Helen and Bonnie, where's Bonnie? There she is. Are avid listeners, and it was so exciting to hear that they found me and invited me to come here today. So I invite you all to listen to the podcast and comment. I invite you all also to talk to me today because I don't like to lecture. I am a journalism professor, but one of the things a really good journalist does, right, Dan, is listen, right? The most important thing that a journalist can do, the most important thing that we as humans can do is listen. So I'm also here to listen to you all. You might know some of the things I'll be talking about today. You might disagree. Raise your hand. Yell at me. I want this to be a discussion. I want this to be fun because I believe we are all in this together very strongly. And that's what I hope to do with all the work that I do in all the different facets between teaching and writing and my podcast and talks with new friends and old friends. So I'm so glad and happy to be here. I'm going to do a little bit of technical work here because I only see the PowerPoint backwards, so I need to see it frontward. I'm not that good. And I also want to show you a couple of things. As a teacher, I did, bring some homework for you guys. So if you guys need a reading list, I brought some books I'll refer to. They're really, really great. If you want some books, part of what I do at the doorstep is hold book talks. I've been tracking down, if you know, Maria Ressa, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. So this is a really good one. That might be an upcoming book talk, knock on wood. But we have some great recommendations in case you're looking for some summer reading at this beautiful country club. You could just go outside and read a book. Yes. Oh, excellent. Please see me afterwards. They're so great. One of the things that I started out with Helen discussing is how to put this all together. The initial title was, positives and negatives, and I said, no, let's be optimistic, and let's make the case for optimism. Let's see what is going on and talk about it, and you also feed me information and talk about it. And what does it mean to be a woman in the world today, dealing with the issues that we all know and love? One of the inspirations for me for this talk was Eliza Reid, Secrets of the Sprachar. So guess what you all are? You're all Sprachar. Anybody know what that is? Nobody? Guess? Any guesses? No. It means extraordinary women. And men, you can, be allies of the Sprachar. The Secrets of the Sprachar is a wonderful look by, anybody know who Eliza Reid might be? I'm going to read to you how she defines herself because I think it's really important that we understand who we are first before we engage with the world, and we have our own identifiers. So, Eliza Reid, quote, I am an entrepreneur, author, speaker, mother, feminist, and immigrant, and I am married to the President of Iceland. Eliza Reid is the First Lady of Iceland. Secrets of the Sprachar, highly recommend, but she is really so much of the inspiration for my talk today because of what Iceland does in terms of supporting not only women, but families. So the things that make society run better, more efficiently, happier, even. On global indicators, Iceland is also one of the happiest places on earth. Anybody been to Iceland? Anybody? And was it happy? Yes, definitely. And so what she does in this book is talk about, the global gender gap and how we can look at issues to address some of what you all might have felt in your careers, home lives, what she calls the mental load of women who often have to do a little bit extra and a little bit more on many different fronts. She addresses the different ways women are spoken about in media. I think that's an issue if we wanted to talk about after. I'm going to leave it open also to your interests. How women are represented in politics, how we get paid or not for our work, how we are educated and the burdens that are placed on us, and also healthcare. I've been excited to know and hear the conversation that menopause is now a discussion point for healthcare across companies. So go companies talking about that, because frankly, that's new. That is new. And so health, across the life cycle. Sometimes we focus on the younger side of life, right? And we forget that life is long and we need to focus across the life spectrum. So we'll talk about some of these issues today, and hopefully in the Q&A I'll hear from you what you think is important and continue the conversation. But we have to mind the gap. Who loves London? Yeah, mind the gap. We have to mind the gap. Recently, and this kind of struck me, I wanted to share with you in case you hadn't heard it, the General Antonio Guterres said at the Commission on the Status of Women that it's going to take 300 years for gender parity. Are you shocked? 300 years for gender parity globally. 300 years. Today. 300 years to global. And what is that for those of us who hashtag follow the money? I worked at Forbes for many years. That was our mantra, follow the money, follow the money. That's equals $12 trillion that we are missing on a global scale because of jobs lost, because of opportunities of women not being educated. So when I'm speaking globally, because I think we need to think globally, and you can reflect that locally in what you see on a local level. Bottom line, everyone gets left behind when women get left behind. Everyone gets left behind when women get left behind. But we can't do it alone, and so I'm going too fast. This is my favorite quote from one of my idols, Christiane Amanpour. Right? Fabulous, I love her. The most important challenge is still being considered second-class citizens. And the most important thing for us is to get men on our side. Men, I'm applauding you for coming today. Thank you for coming. This has to be something that men help us with. It's not a question of just swapping who's dominant. We're not looking for female dominance. We're looking for equality and to level the playing field. And we can't do that without men's buy-in as well. And I think that's important to say, because sometimes it becomes very binary, and I don't like that. I like to look across the spectrum and talk. I like to talk. By the way, you'll get to know me, and you know that. So I'm moving to an example, and I preface this example with, this is not an uncontroversial global leader, but this week, anybody read Thomas Friedman's op-ed in the New York Times about Israel and Saudi Arabia? It was good, right? Yeah. So I preface this with, I dislike MBS, and I'm happy to have that filmed. Hi, MBS. I don't appreciate him because of what he did, of course, to Khashoggi, but we won't go there. What we're talking about today is women, and he has advanced women's rights in Saudi Arabia. So Thomas Friedman pointed out that in Saudi Arabia today, that the change is happening from the top down. And I don't know if you know this, but women weren't allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia until recently. I don't know if you're shocked by that or if you knew that, but now they're not only able to drive, but the first Saudi female and first Arab female astronaut has just developed a drive at SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from the Kennedy Center. I mean, isn't that cool? So that his op-ed was pointing out, we need allyship. It takes a village, right? That's another coined phrase, to work together to make change, particularly because right now, there's not many of us in power, right? So we need allyship. He also look, my finger's not doing very well. He also said, and this was another great quote that got me to thinking about our global sharing of values. Because I think we live in an era of partisanship, and it gets depressing, yes? How many of you are depressed if you hear the word partisanship again, right? Yeah, same. And I thought, you know what? I think, and I've always thought this, and when I go into the classroom, I always think we're more together than apart. It's hard to prove. And then I read Thomas Friedman's piece. I'm like, yeah, you got it. You nailed it. He was talking about Israel and his recent visit to Israel. I have never been. Anybody been to Israel recently? Anybody recently? So maybe you've noticed these changes. So he said there's a huge difference between 5 years and today. And so I'm going to say that exponential change is driven, and we'll talk about this more, my theory is by social media. It's kind of the Moore's law of societal change. I'm saying that every 2 years, we really have seen this rapid increase because of this connection that social media. And I know everybody is down on TikTok and is down on the mental health problems of social media for young kids, but what it's enabled us to do is exponentially connect with other people. And this example, and I'm just going to read it for those of you and then go to his full op-ed, quote, I am convinced that a lot more people in Israel and in the region are exhausted from hating one another and have transcended the political divides, or at least want to, within their societies and among their societies. Their lived realities are now so much more entwined than you'd think. As much as Israeli media outlets and politicians are narrow-casting their ideologies every day, Israel's emerging blended society is on full display every night on primetime TV. An ultra-Orthodox female celebrity chef on one channel, an Israeli Druze, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, female celebrity chef on another, an Israeli Arab star journalist on another. And this week, the sports news has been dominated by the dream journey of Israel's under-20 soccer team, which just beat Brazil 3-2 in the quarterfinals of the under-20 World Cup Championship in Argentina. The Israeli team is composed of young observant Jews, secular Jews, and 3 Israeli Arabs. 2 of Israel's 3 goals against Brazil were scored by Israeli Arabs, prompting one wag on Israeli Twitter to remark, no Arabs, no goals. I mean, I really do think, also Twitter, I have a love-hate relationship with, so I say that's, but it is a platform that connects and is a platform that shares ideas. And I'm going to share some of these ideas that have been shared that you may have heard about. Some might be new, but I really want to hone in this part of my talk on the importance of global sharing of values via social media, because I do think that is what has connected us to a degree that will, I think, drive closer relationships that can forge partnerships in an era of discussions of disparate values. The first one, I'm sure many of you know, Mahsa Amini, who was murdered by the Iranian regime for not wearing her hijab properly, spurring protests that continue to this day in Iran, spurring movements among my students to know and want to get involved in Iranian protests here in New York City. So I teach in New York City. And that is all via social media. And what happened, though, it wasn't just the women protesting in Iran. It was the brothers of the women protesting. The brothers and the mothers came out. So it became, and is, continued today, a societal protest driven by social media, despite the fact that the government is trying to tamp it down, shut off internet access, love VPNs, gotta love the VPNs, that enables you to still connect to the global internet and connect with information and get this information to what my podcast is called, right? The doorstep, to our doorstep, so that we know and hear these issues and can connect with them in a way that 30 years ago we couldn't do. Heck, 10 years ago we couldn't do. Remember, my theory of Moore's law of social media, it's really happening, and I think it's so important. This is one example that you may have heard of. Why isn't this moving? Here's another example. Have you heard of Ala Salah? She, when there were the first protests in Sudan, in 2019. This is an iconic image. You may not have seen it. She got on top of a car and was exhorting people to protest for women's rights in Sudan, and she became known as the Lady Liberty of the protests, right? Can you see that image? It was an iconic image. But the reason I use this picture, look at the phones. Look at the phones. Social media. Phones connected, took this image, spread it around, and are the drivers of, now, there's a terrible conflict going on in Sudan today, but guess who's driving the change? The people on social media are connecting, and this recent podcast, are connecting to diaspora Sudanese here in the US who are providing support and help and spreading the message. And I think this was also a powerful message in the image in the Arab world, and I think images and videos are something that we connect to now more than ever, right? More than sometimes the written word, and as a journalist, and as we have a journalist author here, that hurts, right? Like when your kids don't read, but it's okay because images and social media connection, I think, are just as powerful. I'm really leaning into the pro-social media here. Okay. How about this hashtag, any Spanish speakers? Ni una menos. Yes, have you heard of it? Not another one. A hashtag that emerged online for women who were disappearing. Femicide is, unfortunately, has a high rate in Latin America. 14 of 25 countries in Latin America have the highest femicide rates in the world. A woman is a victim of femicide in Latin America every 2 hours. So Ni una menos started off as a slogan in Argentina and then continued on through Brazil, through Bolivia, Chile, Mexico, Peru, as a gathering point for women to speak up. Again, the power of social media to make these connections and also to resonate here. And I think as America becomes more diverse and has a greater number of Spanish speakers, I think what's really important is to pay attention to different languages. I mean, how many of you read a different language? Oh, great. Good amount. Read news in other languages. Don't just read in English. Gosh, English newspapers. Right? Just read in other languages if you can, get translations from other newspapers, because this is how you find out what's going on in the globe. This is such an important movement across Latin America that I don't think gets enough attention here unless you're a part of the community where it's happening. Another 4B movement, anybody? Anybody? Also an internet movement. Started by two South Korean YouTubers. Anybody familiar with South Korean society? Yeah? And it's very patriarchal. The women are finding it difficult to move up the ladder. Some of the gender gaps we talked about, why it's going to take 300 years to get to gender parity, right? It's hard for them to get jobs. If they get married, then they have to give up their employment to stay home, care for children, care for elders. And so these two young women said, no. 4 no's, no marriage, no children, right? They kind of went on the extreme, and so they're getting vilified. So we'll talk about that in a second. But yet it created this discussion in this very conservative society that has then transferred over, and you hear the same thing happening in Japan. If any of you travel to Japan, yeah. So the same discussions are happening in Japan, which is also leading to lower birth rates, which is then, because people don't like change, enabling the government, run mostly by men, to create stricter policies and to champ down on this movement and expression of women countering that. The balance, I think, will end up on this side, not on this side. But I think it's important to note this. Again, if you read Korean, if you can read other papers, I recommend South China Morning Post to read from news from there. I read the Hindustan Times. Al Jazeera has great international news coverage. I just kind of also want to share where I read things and find out information, because sometimes our U.S. newspapers tend to be very navel-gazing. And there's a big world out there of 7 billion people, right? Everybody knows Greta. I mean, maybe not personally, but her new movement now, and what she's working on now, is an initiative called Restore Nature. It is a EU law that she wants people to get behind and pass, which would actually obligate countries to restore a set amount of nature, and if they don't, to get sued for it. So I think accountability is the second step. So you can create movements and social buzz and hashtags, but the part two, the next step, is accountability. And that's her focus. And she's been doing this wonderful work since she was very young, protesting Friday strikes. I took my daughter to one when she was a Girl Scout a few years ago. We got to hear Greta speak. She's an amazing, amazing woman now. She's 20, right? She's been around. Think about how long she's been around. I know we all lost the COVID years, so everybody just add 2, right? She was a teenager, now she's 20, and still out there at the forefront, but also inspiring the younger generation. So one of the things that Helen and I talked about was, well, how different a 16-year-old is than a 21-year-old, than a 30-year-old. Do you guys notice the same thing, right? The 16-year-old, which is my daughter, is this digital native that lives online and knows the space, and she told me I needed to include Greta. Who wasn't first on my list because I thought you would know her, but then I looked at her new initiative and I thought, wow, that's so interesting that she thinks of her as one of the inspiration for movement and activism. 21-year-olds, different. They have a love-hate relationship a little bit. It's so fascinating. Remember my Moore's Law theory. The difference between 16 and 21 is that, and the difference between 21 and 30, did I give away your age? You're gonna kill me, is vast too, right? How much are you on the internet? Is the difference between 40? Who's 40? You don't have to give away your age. How much are you on social media? Not much. 50? Not much? Okay, here's my plea to you. I want you all today, after to get on TikTok. I know, you're like, no, it's Chinese run. No, I know, we can discuss.
It's not that it's Chinese run. I'm a little bit more cynical. So you have sitting in here somebody who ran an influencer network. So we just to understand what that means, think the biggest end of it is a Kardashian who could sell a post for several $million just because they influenced public opinion. And we basically sold campaigns for over 500 brands. So I had a little bit of a cynical side to the virtues of social media and the downsides. So I understand exactly where you're coming from. I think it has done as much good as it's done harm.
Yeah.
It's about the balance.
Yeah. I hear you and I agree, but I think so have newspapers.
Yeah, no,
So has radio.
and I also tell people,
Yeah.
you would never say to somebody, don't use your TV, because not being on social media is the equivalent of don't use your TV. You can't really be plugged into the trends and the way things are moving in the world without knowing what's happening in that. But it's also ridiculous.
Well, I'm an eternal optimist, but we can have this debate. I love it. Here's why. So as I was talking to my daughter, because I wanted to make sure I want to run the full spectrum, and I'm always listening, right? So you always have to listen. She said, you need to look at the advocacy TikTok. That's where you find information. So we all remember Malala and how she was viciously attacked. So Malala Fund has a TikTok, and it is so inspiring. My daughter said, you have to look at advocacy TikTok because the algorithm for TikTok is what you want. It's not like Instagram, which is pushing you, whatever Facebook hears you talking about, and then you see your ad on Amazon, right? When you're searching, so she searches, and she's particularly interested in horses, so her entire TikTok. When you're searching and for advocacy, you come up with things, and this is how this generation is connecting to issues in Afghanistan. So think about, you sitting in Connecticut are now talking to Malala because she's online telling you what's going on in Afghanistan in a way that is completely different reporting than what the New York Times is doing, or what you're hearing from DC reporters, right? And so I don't say use it as your only source of information, but I say maybe there's something that we can learn. So take a chance. I don't actively post anything, but I lurk. You can be a TikTok lurker. But you're right, some of the other ways that Afghanistan, for example, is in the news is I was just downtown Brooklyn yesterday in Dumbo. You guys are familiar with Dumbo? And they have a big photo spread on Afghanistan, broken promises, navigating a world after Taliban rule, right? Downtown Brooklyn. So we are connected so much to the world that we don't even realize. Maybe in our day-to-second minute when we're worried about groceries and picking up the cat from the vet, right? We don't think about it. But to see that as you're walking by, you're just walking by in Dumbo and you see this. And I think this is an example of how engaged we are and we don't even know it. And I'm just saying acknowledge how engaged we are. Make sure you're reading a variety of things and getting information from a variety of sources. Because anytime you single source anything, I mean, I don't know, I like shopping personally, and I bargain shop, right? You compare prices. Compare news, right? Compare data sets. That is how you get the best information. So give it a try and look around you because I think that, yes?
I agree with you a lot. And of course, the issue of being discerning is really an issue. It's an issue. I'm not going to say any or any other thing. I work with a lot of younger people as a teacher, not in the classroom, but privately. And what I'm noticing is, the difference I've been doing this enough time over, that I'm noticing the difference, like in Gen Z versus it's just interesting to see because there is I'll call it a new wave almost, new wiring. I think they came in this way, honestly. Oh my God, they're rainbow children or something. I'm not naming anything. And they just know things. I mean, they know things. And so my job now is not to teach them, although I do, because I'm an English major. And
No, your job is to teach. Yeah. Yeah. Write a sentence.
But I want them to teach me. And I was just thinking, we were talking about ideas here before we came up to the podium about how to broaden, a community like ours and share information. That's my thing. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if a small town like Weston could have an interchange between these younger people? We're talking about technology in more specific terms, but how about having a discussion? Like real sharing, not pontificating, not like we have an agenda. Just teach us what you're learning from TikTok or from, how are you gathering information? How are you, it would be wonderful because, of course, we're locked in our silos. That's a cliche that I don't want to bring up. But the point is, I just got an idea here from you.
Yay!
I learned so much from my students.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I had a student yesterday, not yesterday, but a couple days ago, he said, I said something about Iraq, Ukraine, not Iraq, Ukraine. And he said he knew nothing about it. He's a 10th grader. He knew nothing about the war. And that's the downside. He's on all that stuff. He knew nothing. I said, you don't know there's a war in Ukraine? No, you're making it up. He said. So do I have something to do here? Yes.
Yeah.
And so, it's like a back and forth. But that's not to say that it's an interesting matter.
Well, thank you for your comment, Deidre. So I didn't see your name, but so Deidre's saying that there's something shared learning, and I think, hey, you guys do events. I saw the website. I scoured your website, right? The League of Women Voters does many events. I think it's absolutely great to ally with the Weston High School and have an event there and talk about the uses of information and how people are getting information, and maybe they can help you guys get on TikTok right? I think that is also, Deidre, why I love being a teacher, right? I learn from my students. I learn how they've changed. My 16-year-old is much smarter than I was at 16. I don't know how you feel about your children, but I think that the things that she knows globally, she is way more globally aware than I was at 16. Now, there are some things that remain the same, petty fights, etc. Right? But they are. Now, some are not, and some don't know things. I recently had a college student who didn't know who the Beatles were. And I was like, oh, I don't know how to explain the Beatles to you. Oh, well. But you know what? I might not know who Ice Spice is. I mean, now I do, but I might not. You might, right? So I think that you're absolutely right. It is a give and take, and it's learning, and it's listening. So I go back to one of the things I said in the beginning. It's listening. When you listen, you can learn, and I think that's one of the most important things that I do. And therefore, I think women are good listeners. And so when women lead, this is tiny writing, so I'll read you some stuff. But when women lead, and this is also what I learned from Eliza, there is an established and growing evidence that women's leadership and political decision-making processes improves them. For example, research on panchayats, local councils in India, discovered the number of drinking water projects in areas with women-led councils was 62% higher than in those with men-led councils. In Norway, a direct causal relationship between the presence of women in municipal councils and childcare coverage was found. The other thing that women are effective at is working across party lines. And so I think that's why it's important to get more women in the room. I had an interesting discussion with someone from Norway who was talking about this initiative because they were trying to save energy. So the male-led council said, okay, we're going to shut off all the streetlights at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. And the women were like, excuse me, I have to walk home in the dark and I don't feel safe. But it was just this, not listening, not hearing, right? So the more you have everyone in the room discussing, I think the better policies arise. The other example I wanted to give, which I thought was fascinating, and I do this from my work at Forbes, and my work in Forbes Power Women list, is that overall, when you look at the studies, women give more than men, charity-wise, dollar amounts, which impacts change. So I'll give you two examples who you might know. Ursula von der Leyen, she is currently the #1 woman on the Forbes Power Women list. It's a fun list. I encourage you to look at it. The Kardashians are on it. I'm sorry, they are. But what is your name? Lisa. Yeah.
I expect they probably will be there at some point.
Yeah, they are. But the #1 is Ursula for her work gathering European leaders, of which she is, by the way, one of the only women, to get behind Ukraine, to support Ukraine, to have one united voice. And also she took the European Union through COVID, which was a big deal. So she's currently the #1 woman. But also we have, anybody know Mackenzie Scott? Yeah. So her wealth is obviously inherited from Bezos, but she is the #1 giver in the entire world. And I thought I wanted to use her as an example, as not only someone on the billionaires list, but someone who is actively very much engaged in charitable giving. And when we see that, right, we are inspired by that. So the other reason I'm throwing out all these people stories is because for me, life is about people stories. I've loved meeting you today because you're people, you're real human beings, right? You aren't a hashtag, you're not a trend, you're real people with real feelings. And it's important to give people examples. And I think she is one of my favorite examples. But on the flip side, the challenge, so one of the, this is called the case for optimism, but you need to know the challenges in order to be optimistic. So one of the challenges is that there aren't that many female billionaires, right? It's about 12, 13%. That the list is still very much dominated by male billionaires and old money, and it's really hard to break through. So that when we do, I think we need to celebrate them. And so, thank you for inviting me here today to do that with you. Oop. Wrong way. Okay. So we have a lot more work to do. We have a lot of work to do. 31 countries only have women as heads of government or state out of 195 in the world. That then trickles down to all levels. We see that in our own Senate and Congress. Globally, less than 1 in 4 cabinet ministers is a woman, and they tend to have policy portfolios for things like human rights and gender equality, and not so much in things like defense or economy. So it's still very genderist, but changing. but changing. And so my case for optimism, if I can find the, well, this is just a slide. I'm not going to go through it, but I'll give you my presentation if you're interested. It lists where all the women are in power. So if you're interested in a particular area of the world, this actually has data and numbers. I just love this. I love data. I love numbers, so I had to include it, but I will not test you on it. But I wanted to pull out a couple of women that you may not have heard of that I thought were fascinating. One is Najla Bouden Ramdani. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The first female prime minister in the Arab world, prime minister of Tunisia. That is a big advance in an area of the world that doesn't have that kind of representation. And I thought it was interesting, again, to talk about people stories and not just, there's only 31. Well, what does that mean? Well, here's one of the 31s, and actually having her as the first female prime minister in the Arab world is kind of a big deal. Here's another one. Here's why I included Samia Suluhu Hassan. And I included a photo of her with Kamala, so this happened this year, because of course, for women in New York City, I'm so biased in New York City, there is an outside United States, outside of New York City, which includes Weston, and the rest of America, but seeing Kamala is seeing someone of a different race, ethnicity, someone to aspire to. So I included Kamala in this because it was the meeting between two female heads of state. I mean, I know Kamala's vice president, but who knows what happens? Biden's, old. But she met with Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan, who took office recently in Tanzania, and she is really working hard to roll back some of his most unpopular policies. And I just thought it was so impressive. I know nothing about Tanzania. There was a spike in doorstep listeners from Tanzania, and I thought, what? Why is there a spike in doorstep listeners from Tanzania? And so I looked up Tanzania, and I thought, I wonder what happened in Tanzania. And here we have a woman came to power, and maybe she's promoting more English, right? So things are happening in this part of the world, and I love to see that. So that was my optimism, second example of optimism after giving you that terrible statistic of 31. Yes. Here's another optimistic. I tried to go around the world as best as I could. I apologize for parts of the world I'm missing. Ofelia Fernandez. She's the youngest legislator in Latin America. She entered government at 19, and what you're seeing actually in Latin America is a lot of younger people entering politics. I think you're seeing that here too. Again, I think it's, driven by Instagram and Twitter, people talking about politics and talking about change. The reason I particularly included her is because she has been trolled tremendously online. A lot of hate speech. And I think one of the problems and negatives of the social media that we're talking about is there is a lot of online hate. But I think if we don't talk about the online hate, we're never going to be able to address it. And so she speaks out very vehemently against people trolling her. And I think we, as a society, need to do a lot more to acknowledge that. So I included her for that reason. Her youth, her energy, her making change in male-dominated society, but also because she's also trying to fight against online hate speech. You won't find much about her in English language. Again, it's Spanish language, but this is, again, read widely, know what's going on in the world, because families are connecting in interesting ways. I'm going to tell a family anecdote. We had a cousin who dated a girl from Peru throughout the entire pandemic because they met on social media, and then they visited each other. And, it was this interesting connection, things that can happen on the positive of social media, that the world seems so much smaller. His mom, our cousin, was mortified that he was dating someone from Peru because he would move to Peru. And he was like, what? It's next door. And it was this fascinating intergenerational conversation that I think we see. So I think it's really important that we kind of get out there and see who is leading around the world and who's making change, because a lot of change needs to be made. So here's my challenge that we need to address in order to be optimistic. Only 14 countries of 190 surveyed offer full legal protection to women, according to a report from Women, Business, and the Law in 2023. This is from the World Bank data. Only countries like Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Greece, Iceland, my friend Iceland, Ireland, Latvia, Luxembourg, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Germany, and the Netherlands, Dutch, offer full protections. And what that means is full parental leave policies, child care policies, policies that support women across the life cycle. So according to the World Bank and according to World Bank data. That's terrible. By the way, the U.S. is not on this list, guys. You noticed that, right?
Right, and we also don't have equal rights still. And we have a wide gender gap on the pay scale.
Yeah, so speaking of data, so the U.S. here, if you look at this tiny graph here, is, I think our score is 93, if we're looking at, the U.S. is somewhere down here. I mean, it is behind, like, Cyprus. Because we don't guarantee equal pay, equal pensions, parental leave, I mean, so much. We can go on and we can talk about that, and I do have a section, and we can talk about that later, but I wanted to show you where the U.S. ranks, and I wanted to show you the people making change, because I'm always optimistic. I really am. Here, I'm going to give you two examples, two people who I feel are optimistic, both people I've interviewed on the podcast series, so you can go to find our conversations. We're going to have Christina Luntz back. She is the co-founder of the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. So what is feminist foreign policy? It questions the traditional understanding of state security and calls for a people-centered approach to security and peace. Remember what I talked about? People, right? We're all people-centered approach to security and peace, and talks about rights, resources, and representation for women at the table. Germany and a couple of other countries, only 11, have adopted feminist foreign policy as part of their agenda. Her mission, so her book is in German, it's being translated into English, so we're hopefully gonna have a book talk in the fall with Christina. But she wants to make this a part of every conversation so that we're thinking differently, not only locally, but globally. Exactly what Betty Hill wanted to do. And so I think Christina Luntz also stands on Betty Hill's shoulders. She's a great one to watch, rising leader. Oops. As is Leila Zaidane. She is the president and CEO of Millennial Action Project. Anybody heard of Millennial Action Project? Nobody? It's a great, also had a conversation with her before the midterms. They actually track and support those millennials and younger running for office, and they have data on their website about how many people in the midterms ran for office in the latest. 334 candidates were under 45, true millennials 193, and 91 were 35 and younger. I think the reason I'm talking about her is because she and that organization support a younger rise in leadership to get their voices heard. And the other thing they do, which is this crazy word called bipartisanship. Do you remember that word? They actually have a great network of Republicans and Democrats working together. So it's a great organization. Leila is definitely going places. I probably will have her back as soon as the Republican candidates stop announcing everybody who's running to talk about kind of what's going on at that level, because we're not seeing it at that top level, but remember, it's a funnel. You have to, right, anybody, I'm a former management consultants, anybody in the room? Right, it's a funnel. You have to have like 1,000 hits to get to like the one. So we have to fill that funnel. We have to fill that funnel with leaders. And by the way, they don't necessarily have to be young leaders. They just have to be leaders and people who are engaged. These were just some of my examples of people I think who are making massive change. Now, we can talk about some of our deficits, but when the World Bank looks at these different areas to determine whether we are and how we can close that gender gap that we started this conversation at. So I know I've been talking a long time. I want to hear from you, but I want to reiterate that it is a life cycle, it's a funnel, and it's across workplace issues, parenting issues, asset issues. That they rank all of these countries where we don't do well. I particularly look at labor force equity, pay equity, educational equity, but we can talk about different things. labor force equity, it is about getting people in jobs. We were talking about AI, right? There are not enough women in AI. What does that mean? That means that then the things that are being coded with a particular bias that doesn't include the other side. So we need to get more women in AI. We need to get everybody paid equally. I still don't think I'm getting paid equally, and I've been working for a very long time, right? And educational equity, I thought was really interesting. The statistic was that there are more women graduates of college than men, but women carry much more of the debt burden than men. Isn't that fascinating? Fascinating statistic. So I have some more statistics, but I'm not going to bore you on each category, because some of them you've probably heard. I want to talk about solutions. I want to talk about the case for optimism, what different people can do, businesses, elected officials, media, not-for-profits, civic organizations. We all have to work together. And I chose that quote. I didn't know you were going to use that quote, but I love that quote from Betty. After all, women have a powerful voice, not only in Weston and Connecticut affairs, but also on global issues. Thank you so much for listening. Now I want to hear from you, though. So it's not ending. We're still having a Q&A. I want to listen. I will send this to you, so you have it if people want the data and statistics, because I also have a link to sources, because, again, I love data for you. Oh, you didn't see Betty Hill. I had Betty. Hold on. Yay. Yes.
So, how far are we from having a U.S. female president?
A stumble? Oh, I'm sorry. That was really mean. I apologize. Yeah. No, my honest opinion is pretty far. Why? Some ideas. Why? Speak up. Fran. The funnel. If we want to be unbiased and have kind of rely on kind of some of the data, it's the funnel, right? We're not funneling at the moment. We don't have enough of a funnel, right? Where do people get elected from? Governorships, senatorships. We don't have enough of a funnel. Or you come in with money, and we don't have enough female billionaires, right? Or enough women who are willing to take up. Like Mackenzie Scott, I adore her. She is notoriously a hater of the press. Doesn't give interviews, right? So someone who would have the cash resources, right? Because it's expensive.
But it takes an unusual personality.
It does.
It really takes an unusual personality that's willing to put themselves. We were speaking earlier about the willingness of a young woman to run an online initiative to fight against hate online. Which, as a journalist, you understand is a real threat. So whenever somebody writes an article for the New York Times, they ready themselves for the onslaught of what they're going to be hit with. And that's behind a door or a screen. So if you're putting yourself up there as a politician, you have to, whether or not you're moneyed or backed or anything else, you have to be like of a personality that says, I don't care if they come at me, I'm going to stand here like Teflon. Which I think is relatively unusual. It just takes one, though. So on the optimistic side, it just takes one of us to say, I got it, I got the package, I'm going for it, and come along and have a vision. But that's like harder to find because there are a lot of people willing to beat you down before you even
But I do think it's the funnel. So let's say instead of having 200, we have 2,000 funneling in, right? Then maybe that one is going to come out of 2,000, right? Yeah.
to stand up and say, I don't care,
And it also is not just about one person. It takes a team, and but we need to funnel that. And I don't think that we're lacking in many things in our education system. So we have educators here, I know. But one of the things we talk about at Carnegie Council is the lack of civic education, so that young people don't understand that aspect of their responsibility to society. I teach political reporting, And sometimes and I have my students do an election guide, right? You may have seen that. I make them look up the candidates and do the issues. And in New York City, we have city council, we have, there's lots of districts, and as I'm sure there are here, and they get so confused. There is zero civic education in our schools. That's a great place to start for, so in terms of how society needs to change together, can't just be, oh, we don't have a woman, right? We don't have a funnel, we don't have civic education where people understand where they can participate. When we hold, by the way, I do think there's also optimism though, when we hold voter registration drives at my college, everybody is dying for information and everybody's dying to sign up. And everybody just wants information on when can I register, because a lot of them are absentee voting because they're away from home. We need to make that information more accessible. Something maybe you guys can do, right? Like, set up in the high school and do a voter registration drive. No joke, right? And maybe you already do that, but
I think it's going to take, as you said, very importantly at the beginning, and that is men and women.
yes.
I'm thinking about the gun rights situation. David Hogg of March for Our Lives. I mean, he is such a strong leader. And he's so strong that we think, well, he should run for something. Right?
But he doesn't want to.
But when you have someone like him who really cares about the whole matter, he will support a woman, and he'll get other people to support a woman who has a voice, who will then be, it's like you say before, I'm kind of thinking of it as the opposite almost, like a whole bunch of people bringing up,
Yeah.
same thing, same concept.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm so impressed with the young people. People say, oh, they're always looking at their phones. You know what they're doing on their phones? They're reading information.
Sometimes.
That's what's hit them. They're the best of it. You have the best of everything, you have a really lousy, undervalued things too. So we're not talking about that one. So I just think that young people who bring each other together, and it's, we have huge issues. Young men are as much affected by this abortion thing as women are. I mean, they're the ones who get them pregnant. They're the ones who have to father people. They're the ones who are caught in this terrible, their voices aren't being heard, et cetera. So
Yeah.
a lot of things, it's that common purpose, common men and women, young and old. Well, we've got a generation gap there. But mostly it's that kind of master.
I agree it's men and women, but I don't want to just put all the onus on young people. I think what I find is, young people struggle with thinking that, oh, the climate is ruined and we're supposed to fix it. Like, you hear a lot of that in the news media, and I don't like that either. Well,
For spreading COVID. I had two
yeah.
5-year-olds in my house at the time. They were like, we're being mean to
Yeah.
spreading COVID.
Yeah.
They were, because they were out, still able to be out there. So there are issues and conflicts.
Well, but yes, and also I want to say that it's everybody. Like, we all have to engage, whether you're young or old or in between or however you define yourself. Like, we started this conversation with Eliza's voice. However you define yourself is to become engaged and to not silo. Somebody used the word silo. Not silo yourself in a particular bucket, and just be willing to have cross-generational dialogues. That I think is the most important thing that we can do, right? Because we know that, and not to place the solution only on young people. It's our job too.
I kind of agree and don't agree with
Mm-hmm.
you. I don't mean it, but I do think it is up to young people. I really do. I don't mean 20-year-olds. I mean 40-year-olds, and 50-year-olds. But it's a young issue. It really is a young issue. I'm 73, okay? I've done a lot of things in my life I'm very proud of. I've contributed as I have, one to a cause of work. And now I'm handing it over. I really am. When I was 20, I was part of the anti-war movement in a big way.
Yes, I agree with the support, but not to make them feel, I get that from my students, they didn't create the climate change problem, but now they have to fix it, and it's your problem. But a lot of times in the media, though, you do see that kind of language, right?
But we have to do a lot of mentoring.
Yes, agree, agree,
In
yes,
every category.
yes.
Because, as you said, they're not teaching civics
No,
anymore.
they're not.
They don't understand local, state, national, global government in any way, shape, or form, or social responsibility to your town, your family, nothing is taught. And you can't count on people learning everything at home.
Agree.
Such
But that's why it makes your organization so important. I mean, I really believe that. Did I? Yes.
I really appreciate you being here. This is fascinating. A lot of
It's we're being kicked out.
being introduced to women leaders. I don't know what you guys, I can but so someone who's in their later careers, I'm very optimistic, and the reason I'm optimistic is I've seen more women in business. We do have 12 female governors across the United States, where maybe 20 years ago we had 0 female governors. We do have more women in politics, and your law about social media changing every 2 years, I think that's happening to women too. Women are being encouraged to be in STEM. They're encouraged to be athletes. They're encouraged not to do this. Like, I don't need to be held back by my gender. And I think that that's much more prevalent now than it's ever been. And was, and then women will say, well, why not?
But you see, the laws have to match that. And so I'm going to shill this book again, but it's really good because Iceland has parental leave policies so that women can actually, spend time with the children the first year. Then the husband has a year. And then they actually, this is crazy, this is going to be crazy, they have 24-hour childcare in case you need it. And it's not called grandma. It's called 24-hour childcare funded by the state because they want women in the workforce, because they realize that women make a difference. And I think so some of I know it's a small country that looks alike, I get it. However, there may be some lessons, some policy lessons. So yes, women are feeling empowered, but they need the policies to support them, right? The leave to care for someone who is elderly, right? And not feel like you can't go back to the same point in your career as where you left it, right? I mean, we're not there yet here in the U.S.
So, my daughter just graduated from med school, we're excited.
Congratulations.
In her class, there are more women than men, which is interesting. But when she takes an Uber to the hospital, the driver almost always says, "So you're a nurse?" And so, and I just say, you gotta get used to it.
Yeah.
And she says, like 1 out of, I don't know, 30 say, "Are you a doctor at the hospital?" And she's like, "Yay!"
But that's the funnel. In 5 years, it's going to be very different.
It's so slow. That's so
Slow, but then, I don't know, I like a historical, wide-reaching. Think about or think about when my family came on a boat and my grandmothers were cleaning ladies, right? Like, slow, and yet I think they're looking down and singing, wow, she's talking to a bunch of women and being inspired. So, slow, but progress. It feels like we're going backwards, I know, but take the long view. Take the optimistic view.
Well, that's the 300 years that you were talking about. I mean, I would definitely say that my mother and I are 19 years apart, and I think she was sold a bill of goods in the 60s that you could have it all, right? Virginia Slims, and you come a long way, baby, to get where you got to today. If I look around this room, I would say that probably a lot of the women in this room feel a little burned up, that they could have it all. And I see the heads are like agreeing, and I can still talk to my mother about this in a very real way, where strides were made, and yet the slope is slipping back in the other direction. And for the United States of America to be so far down the hole
It's organizations like this doing some more programming and trying to get out there and advocate. I mean, one person at a time adds up to change, right?
Right, and we do have a female vice president. No matter what, we have a female vice president. That's progress, like her or not, or, wherever you sit on the line there, it has to be seen as.
And Janet Yellen, and I mean, we could go down the list, right? There are a lot more women in the cabinet now.
We do have Star Wars, which is a really positive banner, if you ask me.
There's a hand, yeah.
I'm curious if you believe or have a sense that society broadly has sort of adopted a view recently, hey, this gender equality problem is solved, and now we got to really focus on racial equality, ethnic equality, sexual orientation equality. Because I have two daughters, and I worry about this because I swear that there's been a shift that I've seen in the last 3 or 5 years. And I read the New York Times every day, and the Wall Street Journal, and CNN, and Politico, and NPR. And I can tell you, I get inundated with articles and things about how there is inequality in race and ethnic and sexual orientation. But I don't see it anymore, hardly at all, about gender stuff. And I worry that there is this sort of, you say 300 years, but I almost get like, you don't get any points anymore for gender equality. You only get points if you're addressing the issues. And I can be more specific. I have a daughter who's a professor. She has to write a DIA statement. She's involved in those. And I can tell you, it's not focused on gender equality. It's focused on other things. I'll give you an anecdote. She spent 4 years in college, 6 years getting her PhD, and she's been out now for 4 or 5 years. She never had a single female professor in her science in 10 years in terms of that. So,
Funnel.
I worry that,
Yeah.
despite those kind of things that she's facing, basically there's this institutional sense now that, that's the old war. We've got to pick the new war now and do that.
So I guess I would counter a little bit with the Supreme Court ruling on abortion has upended that entirely, and I think that women of a certain generation feel that there is still a gender problem, that could happen. I think that depends on what part of the world you're in. So I'm going to answer that question too. Depends on part of the world you're in. We are in an East Coast bubble. We have to recognize that bias. We are in an East Coast bubble. And I think maybe we don't, because of that, maybe we're not seeing what's happening in some parts of the Deep South, right? And the world is, that 300 years is global. So there are parts of the world, Afghanistan, where women don't even exist, right? So my plea to you is to think locally, because it's important, but think globally and the global-local connection. Because if we can't just be the only country doing something, like we have to cross borders, and these have to, be like Christina Luntz and her feminist foreign policy, so that all countries start thinking differently. I think that countries outside of the United States do think about gender in a very different way. Places like Sweden have quotas, for example, for businesses to boards of directors. I mean, things that I think we don't do here, which is why we're so behind. So I think that other countries think about it more. I think we can think about it more by doing more reading and talking about it. You're absolutely right. I mean, my college is inundated also with DEI, which I think is important. I'm not saying it's not important. But I think that in our East Coast bubble, maybe it doesn't rise to maybe Texas, where there are fewer rights of women in certain areas. So I think we have to, I think there's a difference. My part two is media, just because I'm a journalist. All the places that you mentioned are male-dominated newsrooms. And when you have that, again, you have focus on issues from a certain slant. It just is. I'm not saying it's bad or good. We need to have more women at top leadership, more women, female editors across organizations. We don't have that, just like we don't have enough female teachers, professors, right? Depends on what department you're in. In the sciences, it's worse than in communications, right, as a journalist. But top, upper levels, and this is across companies too. Why? Because women leave to have children, right? And then when you come back, you're not going to get at the same position. I mean, we have structural problems across the economy that need to be addressed, including media. And so what happens with media, and I was speaking to Dan, that what I try to do at my podcast, and I really think about it, and I encourage you when you're reading articles to look at who they quote. Are they only quoting men in the article, or do they actually quote women in the article? Who's the author of the article that you're reading? Right? Look at the byline. As important as looking at the New York Times, look at the byline. Who's writing the article? Who's editing that article? Because that slant is going to come through. It just is by virtue of our lived experience, right? If I were to give you my adjectives, I think I have on my LinkedIn, mom, podcast host, professor, always looking for a good story. That's how I define myself, right? So, when you're at different levels, especially in media, it's, and we've only recently, over the last 5 years since Me Too, which by the way, that movement really transformed society. It really did. It's transforming slowly media so that people are saying, okay, well, who's in the top position? What kind of editorial decisions are being made? Are we having enough sourcing from men and women so that you're getting both perspectives? At the doorstep, I make sure every other I'm like, okay, we had a man, let's have a woman. And if we're talking from an expert about Sudan, that person better be from Sudan. Why am I talking to someone who has studied it in Oklahoma? No offense to the person studying in Oklahoma, but I want to hear the voices from the region, right? And I think this is new. This way of thinking is new. In media, I'm speaking of media, and it's really something that people are trying harder to make sure that they're covering the issues more broadly. But all of the companies you also mentioned are New York City based. There is such an East Coast bubble in media, it is crazy. That's why I tell you to read outside publications. Oh, sorry. One more question.
May I just mention, because you didn't mention it at all,
Yes.
what about religion and what it does in terms of...
Yeah, I stay away from religion. Did you have a question? And then I think we have to end.
The gentleman's point about, his daughters, look at how quickly LGBT rights split. I mean, we got to gay marriage almost immediately, right? That wasn't 300 years. That's a smaller population than women. Media jumped on it, and look at all the rights that yes, it's a bit of an East Coast bubble, but the laws are around the country, and the ERA, you can't get anybody to focus on it. It's not, oh yeah, that's an old story. We're done with that. It's gone. We don't care anymore.
Well, do you read the 19th.org? Are you guys familiar with the 19th.org? It's a fabulous publication that focuses on that issue. Yeah.
Why with this much smaller population for LGBT rights, which I'm all for. I mean, it's fascinating to me, though, how that captured media's attention and people's attention to gain more in rights than women can get. And it just, everybody has together. Right? We don't really, you're right.
We need a better hashtag? Yeah.
Maybe there's a lesson to be learned in how you have to market yourself or something, but that to me just seems like an incredible unfairness that was captured. There's something to be learned there about how do you bring that back and make it, and make that for a broader population. We've got to figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't mean to not address the religion issue either. I just think we could spend an entire afternoon talking about the religion issue and what just happened in Oklahoma. But, But I do offer you these books, so I will share the titles with you as great summer reading from around the world. Heartbeat of Iran is from Iran. Mountain Tales is about the trash heaps in Delhi. Secrets of the Sprockar, you have to really read. This one is really fascinating. Blind Spot, The Global Rise of Unhappiness and How Leaders Missed It is really a really interesting read. And then How to Stand Up to a Dictator from the Philippines. So I'll leave these with your librarian.
I hope you agree with me that this was an absolutely fabulous conversation, discussion, presentation. Tatiana, we've all learned and benefited from your being with us today. We have a small gift for you.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun.
Thank everyone for being here. If you aren't a member of the League of Women Voters of Weston, we would love for you to join us or be on our mailing list. You can give your email address to Bonnie, and she will include you. And you don't have to be a woman, even more importantly. A big thanks to Helen DeKaiser, who couldn't be with us today. We miss her terribly. And now Carol Baldwin will tell us who gets the petunias.